Thank you, Everton. Thank you, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to do my timer so I can make sure and stay on track. So what I'm going to speak to you today is a part of our guiding hypothesis at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where I'm the director, and also a globally ubiquitous experience. And so our guiding hypothesis is that everything is interconnected, and that embodying that awareness reveals information and energy not limited by our conventional notions of space and time, and can profoundly amplify transformation, innovation, and well-being. And so the Noetic Signature is really about this revealing of information and energy not limited by space and time that we are proposing is an innate capacity for all humans. And yet the way it is expressed is quite diverse. So on one side, we have got hunches, intuitive experiences that just about anyone could say they have experienced. On the other side, we may have more rare experiences like mediumship, trans-channeling, and then everything in between. And so I would ask you, as you're observing this presentation today, how do you personally express this noetic inner wisdom? And so, of course, we've coined a new term, like we need another term, but we have, called the Noetic Signature. And we've engaged in a multi-phase research program to evaluate this. And we've done this in a variety of ways. Number one, we used a open-ended survey. We wanted to kind of clear the slate and start from scratch. And we asked people to describe in as much detail as possible their experience of this noetic expression. We used that information to create a draft inventory to be able to collect data about how people experienced it. And then we developed a final version, we validated it, and completed it, administered to a lot of people, started sending that out, and we kept receiving these emails saying, well, what do my scores actually mean? How do they compare to other people? What am I supposed to do with this information? And that was really interesting because we kept stressing that this isn't about better or worse than, this is really a learning tool about your subjective experience, but they wanted to know, well, how do I compare to other people? So what I'm going to speak to you about today is about norms and patterns in this data. So the first phases have been published, so you can find these. These are open access. This one is actually still on review. We're looking for reviewers. If you know anything about confirmatory factor analysis and would like to be a reviewer on this on F1000, we'd really appreciate that. It's been sitting there for a year. If many of you know how F1000 works, it's a slightly painful process. So a little bit about the final version of the Noetic Signature Inventory, or NSI. It has 44 items. The stats showed us 12 factors or characteristics that explain the variability of people's subjective experiences. There are 3 to 10 items for each characteristic. And the items were phrased in the past tense, like I have experienced this, and then they answered it on a scale of strongly disagree to strongly agree. So it's not frequency specifically, and it is a subjective experience. So it doesn't say anything about skill or abilities. So I'm going to go through these quickly because we don't have time to get into them today, but the 12 characteristics are general intuition that comes in 3 flavors: emotion, in the body, and mentally. Embodied sensations like goosebumps, physical sensations from other people, actually picking up pain from other people. Inner knowing through touch, otherwise known as psychometry. Inner voice or clairaudience. Mediumship, trans-channeling, automatic writing. Precognition, knowing the future. Telepathy, knowing others' minds. Knowing through dreams. Affecting your personal world. This is actually taking the information and applying it in a practical way And we were surprised about this, but the stats really showed this to be a strong factor because it's not necessarily a ability per se. So we're leaving it in there because we're letting the data drive what we're doing. Visualizing to access or affect. So this includes PK and clairvoyance and remote viewing. So those actually loaded on the same factor, which I personally find very interesting. And then healing. So this is available to anyone who wants to take it. They get a report with their scores. We also have it available to researchers if they want to include it in their studies. And again, we're stressing these experiences are common, but they are individual and it's unique. And what is your specific noetic signature? There's not one that's better than the other. And how do we support people to explore this and use it to support themselves personally and also collectively? So on to what I want to speak to you about today, which is our current study on norms and patterns. So we had 3 specific aims. One was, what are the norms for the 12 factors by age, gender identification, ethnic identification? What are the relationships between those 12 factors? And are there any patterns within individuals such that like a noetic signature type or pattern might emerge? We didn't have any hypotheses on number 1 and 3. These were very exploratory, but for number 2, we were thinking about those 12 factors and made some hypotheses about how they would load with each other, if you will. So the first one, we envision that embodied sensations, knowing through touch, and physical sensations from other people would group together because those are really kind of visceral experiences, even though they're a bit different from each other. We thought that apparent communication with non-physical beings and inner voice, like clairaudience, mediumship, trans-channeling, would also group together. That visualizing to access and affect and healing would group together because if you think about it, healing is could be viewed as PK, and many people do. Intuition, this kind of general knowingness and applying it in your daily life would group together. And then finally, we hypothesized that telepathy, precognition, and knowing through dreams would group together because some people, talk about telepathy and precognition as kind of being different sides of the same coin. So these were our a priori hypotheses. So in terms of the grouping, we had about 3,800 participants complete the survey. They were middle-aged, well-educated, mostly female, and they were mostly of European descent. But there is a bit of variation there. And you see not everybody completed their ethnic identification. We left that as optional. And then it was mostly from the US, definitely English-speaking countries. But we did get a few people from 81 other countries around the world, which is pretty amazing in my mind. So what did we find? In terms of the norms, what you see here, just to orient you, so these are the 12 factors on this first line. This is the groupings that we end up with that I'll share more about in a moment. And so there's the 12, but there's also this, what we're calling NSI Global, which is all of these averaged. And the blue dot is the mean, and the black dot is the median. And so these are called violin plots. So here you see the distribution. And just as a reminder, 0 is strongly disagree and 100 is strongly agree. But really this middle line, which is 50, is neither agree nor disagree. So what we're looking at is the people above this line have had these experiences, whereas below they don't. So this experience of touching an object and being able to know something about it beyond the traditional five senses was the lowest scored. And then on this side, we have knowing yourself and using it in your daily life was the highest, along with our general intuition categories. So this just gives you kind of the, in increasing order, the different factors. Along with this, we have norm tables. So, once this is eventually published, if people are really curious, they can then look at their age, look at their gender, look at their race, and see where they line up on these, look at their scores, etc. So, speaking of age, this is a ribbon plot, and the ribbon plot represents mean and standard error, and it's grouped by age categories. So teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, etc. So what you may notice here pretty quickly is that the people in the 90s have quite a bit more variation than the other groups, and yet there's quite a bit of overlap across the board. The people from 40 to 69 represented 59% of our participants, and there was really no meaningful differences in age groups for these various factors. And if we look at the literature, we also see mixed evidence on that. So in our study, there was a wide range of participants in terms of age, and there was actually minimal difference between the age groups in the mean scores. And, we do see some studies, like in mediumship, where experiencing these at younger ages translates into experiences at older ages. But that's not necessarily true, because there's trans-chilling studies where people experience it at older ages. So I think there's not really a clear picture in terms of age and these psi or noetic experiences. Oh, and then children. So, we just do studies on adults, and that's primarily because of ethical reasons, and our institutional review board doesn't allow us to do work on children. I think this is a wonderful, incredible research area that is unutilized. I know that there is one researcher, I think in Brazil, who's working with children. And so I wish we could work with children, because I think it would be a fascinating area before their ego personality gets fully entrenched. So in terms of gender identification, we had people choose one of three items, and they could, of course, leave it blank. So it was male identification, female, and another. And so we found that people who identified as female had much higher scores than people who identified as males, and people who identified as another had significantly higher scores as well. And so I find this area really fascinating, especially in our current culture. There's so much talk about gender identity, sex, etc. And so in our sample, it's mostly middle-aged, older, educated women from the US. And there was actually some chatter amongst colleagues recently about why is it that only women, not only women, but mostly women, are participating in these studies. And, someone was commenting that it used to be that it was mostly men. And so it's kind of been an interesting flip. In my field of complementary alternative medicine, it's very similar demographics. So I don't know what's going on there. Maybe we can talk about that later. So I mentioned this already. Again, in the literature, there are many studies that are showing that women have more experiences, that they have stronger belief, although the belief results are a little bit more mixed, and that they're more curious and experimental in terms of researching or experimenting with these type of topics. In terms of future direction, these are all convenience samples, and many of these studies are convenience samples. It would be really amazing if we did a random sampling with an equal number of people in gender categories. I think that would be a really fantastic future direction. And then also what we're starting to do is instead of having multiple choice, male, female, another, we're also giving them a slider for masculinity and femininity. Because is it really about sex, or is it the balance of their, feminine nature versus masculine nature and the qualities that those embody? So I'm really excited about that. In terms of racial demographics, I felt really torn about this work because I don't want to highlight differences across race, and yet I was encouraged to keep going with this. And we did not really see differences across the ethnic racial categories. The one thing that did come up, this is the multi-ethnicity. So people who had multiple different ethnicities did score higher on some of the factors because people could mark as many ethnicities as they wanted to. So let's see what notes I have. Okay. So there have been a couple of studies that have looked at ethnicity. We did one study where we found that Black and Asian Pacific Islanders had fewer psi experiences. That was in a sample of about 900 people. It's just one small study. And then these are some other studies that didn't really find any racial differences. So I don't know. This, again, is like a mixed bag. And if we really want to go there to highlight this, then I think it takes a bit more work. Obviously, the way people think about these phenomena are so different by country and the way people are raised. You just look at Brazil, where, Spiritism is just very, very popular and grows versus the UK. So that's really interesting. And I'm all for doing more global studies. There have been very few cross-cultural studies available. There's, lots of evidence that people experience this all over the world. And so how do we do more global studies? So I'm going to have to hurry up here. So in terms of these groupings of the factors, so this first column is what we hypothesize by color. So the applied intuition actually did group together with our stats. I'm not going to get into our stats methods, but I can share that with anybody who's interested. It was here it is, hierarchical clustering. The inner listening one also did pan out, intention effect and embodied wisdom. But what I found really interesting is that the dreams, precognition, and telepathy did not group at all. In fact, they were completely on their own. They didn't group with anything. And so I'll touch a little bit on that in a minute. In terms of the patterns across people, we came up with 5 patterns. And again, this was stats driven. There was a lot less than we would have liked to have seen here, but there were just a few patterns that emerged. And at the bottom here, we don't see the 12 anymore. This is just with the 7 super factors or groupings that we found. So first, there is this higher pattern, people who just scored high across the board. Then there's this lower pattern where it was lower across the board. But what I found most fascinating was the middle pattern, where you see they were different on precognition here, lower and higher scores on precognition. And then the most robust statistical finding was this difference, was the difference in dreams, was whether you received, and Stanley's here, which I love because he's going to love this, the strongest predictor of discriminating between different people was whether they had psi in their dream state or not. So anyway, I find that really fascinating. As we know, dream recall varies significantly among individuals. It's determined in part by personality, culture, cognitive beliefs. There's also physiological connection in terms of right brain activity. Greater right brain activity is linked to more visual impressions in dreams. And we also know, of course, that sleep and dreaming is conducive as it's an altered state, and that altered states are conducive to psi. I know I got to finish. And then perhaps it is this cognitive relaxation, the ego personality mind is gone, and so it can allow things to rise to the surface. So there are a number of limitations. Our demographics were pretty limited. Of course, how do we put these phenomenon into categories? That's always an issue. This was quantitative research, and yet it's hard to put this phenomenon into boxes. And then it's a self-report measure. This is about people's subjective experiences, which I value and I think is incredibly important. And yet this doesn't say anything about their skill or ability, and it doesn't verify it in any way. So now, does it change over time? Can the characteristics be trained? What determines the different characteristics? Is it nature or nurture or both? And this is available to any researcher. We have some collaborations going already with creativity researchers, someone who's doing aesthetic chills, which is really fun, and just deep, deep gratitude to all the people that have gone into this work. You can find us on our website. And I went a minute over. That's not bad. Okay.